Okay, so this is the fourth and last video within this series. This series is called Preparation for the Amaria Instant Buffer. That's technique number 8, part 2. Yeah, this is pretty involved, this particular video, okay? However, I'm not going to be able to do that which it requires, because really this subject matter is so involved and so deep that it would require a year, a team of people qualified, and financial support to be able to fund it. You need to be able to make a movie out of this because it's really involved. We're talking about a technology here. This technology is 100 million years advanced from anything that's being utilized here, at least within the mainstream. I don't know so much about that which pertains to the black operations and all the things that are hidden, but certainly here on the surface, where the majority of the people are working with Tinker Toy technology, this is 100 million years advanced. So it's so advanced, there's no comprehension. It sounds like woo-woo to most people, and understandably so. However, my attempt here to summarize this hopefully will bring a better understanding for you. So the checkerboard mutation, what is this? Okay, it's being utilized through a technology. The name given for that technology outside of the coined checkerboard mutation is the Nerubian diodic crystal grid. Nerubian diodic crystal grid, the NDCG, or the Palladian Nerubian Anunnaki Nerubian diodic crystal grid. Okay, what is that? It's a sentient AI computer system, okay, that is interfaced through sentient consciousness, okay? It's a vibratory sound programmed sequence, that is the checkerboard mutation result, that has been running through Earth's temporal function. Temporal meaning the construct of time, what time is. And if you've been listening to my channel and listening to some of the videos, you have a decent understanding, well, should, depending on which video you listen to, have a decent understanding of what that is, how time is a construct and how it works. We're talking about particle spin rate in regard to the temporal function, right? So sector subdivision of the flash line sequence within Earth's space-time vector locations, speeding up and slowing down the particle spin rate, creating the illusion of so-called time zones, or also you could refer to this as being God zones, not source zones, but God zones, the ones who have boots on the ground and are leasing these lands and utilizing the energy and the life here, you and I, as cattle or chattel. All right, so I want to back this up a little bit and go back to the Palladian Nerubian Anunnaki Nerubian diodic crystal grid. All right, so don't lump all Palladians in with this. That's ridiculous. Same goes for Anunnaki descent, okay? So when we look at the Pleiades, from which we get the word Palladian, I don't even think that's what they call themselves, but, it's a name. Who cares? Like here, you got, how many races do you have? We're all called human, but how many races do you have? Not everybody acts the same. Of course, Earth is a different scenario altogether, and that's what we're going to be talking about, but you get the idea. So, in other words, don't lump all of these together like, oh, they're the ones that caused all this. Give me a break. First of all, this is emanating from the pole star. Okay? Right? Ursa Minor? All right, so one of the things that is taking place here is the, manipulation of the particle spin. This is sector subdivision. We're going to get into this because that's the reason why I showed you the checkerboard there. And we're going to come back to those images because they're going to be very relevant. It's, let me just say this, it's quite difficult to be able to break this down. Most of this, well, I would say half of this information I've discerned and figured out on my own. and reworded things in order for it to be understood in contrast. So there's like 100 million years difference in regards to the technology that's being used. So there's no point of reference here for anybody, really, most people. Again, to emphasize, half of this is coming from me. It has to be something that I understand and relate to before I get into it. I'm not a reader. This is a preface to this, okay? I'm not a reader. I never been. When I was in high school, I stopped going to day school and went to night school. And one of the classes that I had taken was speed reading. So I kind of learned how to do that a bit because I don't like reading. I'm not a researcher. I work on a completely different level. Only reason why I'm bringing this up is simply this. Realize that this is what I'm trying to communicate to you based on the way I understand how things are. You know, take it or leave it. Doesn't really matter. All right, so let me back up and just recap what I just said, okay, prior to me going on a rant there. This is a vibratory sound program sequence that has been running through Earth's temporal function. That is to say, we're talking about particle spin rate. This is part of what it's doing, okay? The result of what this is doing is more than this, but this is in part to what it's doing. So technology that's being used is creating this sector subdivision of the flash line sequence with an Earth space-time vector location, speeding up and slowing down in particle spin rate, creating the illusion of so-called time zones or God zones. All right, and we're gonna cover that a little bit more as we continue. So this planet, again, it's an oblique spheroid. Okay, not going to get into this flat plane thing with a dome. The firmament is a 7-layer frequency fence. This planet is an oblique spheroid. Okay. However, because we're going to look at this checkerboard mutation thing now. Okay, let's start to break this down. However, its quadrants, that is this planet, has been cordoned off, okay, in square grid pattern celestially, because of the Metatronic Wizardek Phantom Matrix pentagram/cube operating technology. All right. This has to do with the way that the space-time fabric is under that operating system, or again, checkerboard mutation, okay, are assembled across the grid that is presently quadrant vectored. Again, we're talking about how it's this vector subdivision and the flash line sequence with an Earth space-time vector locations, okay? Another way to look at it is like this, okay? Think of these vectors as being like pixels, right? So each pixel within the chimera reality is a square, okay? Go back to the checkerboard mutation, take a look at that. Here's an image where you're taking the hexagram pattern, which we see with the Partakai, okay, and it is reconfigured into a square pattern. I'm trying to summarize this because it's so involved, man. Hopefully you're following with what I'm saying. This is helping up to this point. You go, okay, everything is kind of cordoned off, right, within this grid. And this grid is for the purpose of the benefit of those beings here with boots on the ground that are the gods, quote unquote, that are leasing these lands and utilizing the resources being us, really, for their benefit. And each section is delineated to a very particular ruler within this world. Okay. Are you following me so far? Okay. So the 5-point pentagram scalar vibrational science takes the points of the base 8 operating system. We're talking about the checkerboard mutation of each of the 4 corners of a 0 point at the center. Okay, we got a picture here. You see that red dot? Okay, give you an idea. It's just imagery. I'm trying to, move this along in a way that you're able to comprehend it. This is This starts to get really, really, really technical. Okay, so I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. And I don't understand it that well, but well enough to present it to you to the way that I'm doing it. Okay, so while the planet might be, the planet here that we're on might be roundish, it's not round, but it's roundish in its visual perspective from a distance. All right, so the playing field remains square at the physical level. So again, we're talking about space-time fabric. Okay, again, the quadrant vector subdivision that's being utilized through this technology, right? Checkerboard mutation. So in biblical accounts, we can see a reference for this. That is for the four corners of the earth several times because of the quadrant vectors that segment the planet's playing field are square. Because of the quadrant vectors and the way that it's segmented, right? It's segmented in a way for the planet's playing field as being square. Not because the world is square, right? It's just because of the way it's gridded off. See, most Earth maps show the curvature of the planet while spread across a flat map. But time zones and or God zones do not. It's all based on uniform square pixels, exactly like a television or a computer screen, because the way quantum particles self-align, which are such as gauge bosons across a laser beam to lay out the space-time fabric, follows a mathematical vector spacing across a grid. The lines of the map allow the gods to delineate which time zones, God zones, time zones, can be designated mathematically. While those time zones might appear to be crooked or curved from a surface Earth perspective, in real life, those who track the chattel or cattle, the resources, you and I, unfortunately, that's the way they see us. Their respective incomes for what we see with taxation and all this other stuff across a cube vector coordinate. That's how they keep track. A mechanical simulated scalar map is made up of beams of light, photons, right? Photon particles that travel across any section, any space, equal distance apart. If you have a phase pulsation of laser light side by side, it creates a grid, right? It can, by each other, you can see where it lays out. It can create a grid map. Laser light is precise in its pulsation, so it never weakens no matter of the distance. So if those pulsations are timed, it creates a grid giving that point in space a number. An example of this would be, again, computer or a TV screen where you may say, let's say we have like 2,500 pixels going up and then 2,500 pixels going across, creating this square grid, right? We can refer to this as a quadrant, that square grid as a quadrant, and that which is inside as being pixels, or call them vectors. Okay, now laser light or plasma is distinctive frequency that is the same bandwidth. This is interesting. It's the same bandwidth of Y and Z gauge bosons, that is quantum particles. Quantum particles is really the makeup of what we understand within quantum science as being particle. These particles hold the coordinates of every fraction of inch within space-time. Space-time is simply just a word for this holographic playing field. That is to say, time matrices. Okay? Time matrices, understand, time is a construct. Space-time is broken down into quadrants, and quadrants into vectors. Inside 1/4 of that space, each quadrant is placed another grid, which then delineates into quadrants again, and then again, and then again, until you have a scalar grid for every square inch of all space that you can apply a number to each square or pixel vector, right? Okay, now you have a number for every horizontal and every vertical inch, and each one is numerically sequenced, allowing you to locate instantly any inch within the entire space-time fabric. Within that vector, we can program the computer, okay? Theoretically, within this that vector, we can program the computer, quote unquote, to create a hologram of a chair, only though within that pixel point or location. Okay, so every subatomic particle of all space-time has been scalar mapped by gauge bosons, which are 2/3 of the Trinity force that delineates the projection screen of Earth. They are quantum entangled, so they simply agree among each other which pixel to provide the flash that will create reality for that quadrant vector pixel. Each particle is standing right there in order to function as the projection screen of that precise pin dot of manifestation space fabric. What is being done here is scalar mapping. So the firmament is facilitating this 7-layer frequency fence. What we're seeing, and we're not spinning, okay? We're not going around the sun and all that stuff. All this stuff is occurring under that frequency fence. Okay, let's just say these are transposition fields that are created within this Eka-Veka, system, and this goes back to 25,500 BC. Okay, so it created inactivation of the DNA strands 9 through 12. The disassembly of DNA strands 1 through 8. And the insertion of a skip code, which I talk about within, I'll refer to within the sound alike techniques, resulting in an unnatural sequencing of the particum and particate strands in the DNA's double helix, the inactivation of all but 4 sub-frequency bands in all 12 strands, eliminating the natural form of the variable base DNA, scrambling of the natural pairing configuration between the nucleotide sequences within the double helix, and phase lock between Cathara grid center 5. Again, this is in reference to the Ihumbi, the unnatural navel that we see within the manifest template, okay, which we covered, or should I say I went over briefly in a previous video. Now, if you guys want to know more about this, I can do a podcast with somebody that knows a bit about it, because I just don't want to be the only one talking about it. That's something that I'm willing to do. Keep that in mind. Anyhow, so the result here is the DNA template and axotonal lines. Distortions, they block the embodied D12 pre-matter, original Christos blueprint of Earth life forms, and link the body to the reverse matrix, the NDC grid, right, where we just talked about, started off with checkerboard mutation, all right, and this is reduced human life span here, chemical DNA, brain function, and blocked race memory. Yeah, no kidding. This has occurred since 25,500 BC. All right, so it's important to understand this well enough to, when you do the technique, which I said I would get around to doing, and I would provide it on Patreon, not here on YouTube, but on Patreon. And I will look to put together PDFs to go along with this. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to put it together, but it's going to be within one post, and all that will be accessible on Patreon when I do it. But again, to know this stuff well enough to understand your intention while you're doing any technique, because there's no magic trick to the technique. It's you that's facilitating it through a very clear sense of intention. And again, this is the reason for doing these videos here and breaking down as simply as I can the meaning of them, the terms that are being used that you'll find used within the technique itself. It's all about intention and knowing what you're doing. Okay, that's what it's all about. You're facilitating it through your command. All right, folks, there it is. This will be found again, obviously, within the playlist. And whenever I'm able to get around to doing what I can do, I will proceed with doing the technique, which will be a guided technique, and it will be available in Patreon. And I will let everybody know here on YouTube that it is when it is available. But there it is. All right, folks, take care. Thank you. Blessings.